It began so small I almost didn't notice it, the subtle shift in air, like someone had said my name in a room I wasn't in. A friend from back home messaged me asking if I had a new boyfriend. I laughed and said no. Then they sent me a link to a TikTok. It was me in the video, me leaving my house, me walking through the library at uni, me sipping coffee outside my regular cafe. The images were stitched together in slow motion, soft music playing under blurry filters, with captions like, "My girl, always glowing, and waking up next to her is a blessing." But here's the thing, I wasn't dating anyone. I hadn't been for nearly 2 years. I'd never posted these clips. I didn't even know the videos existed until that moment, and I had no idea who had been filming me. More links followed: Instagram Reels, fake accounts tagging me in anniversary posts, even a fan-made slideshow of our vacation to Bali, which never happened. The photos looked disturbingly real. My face smiling on a beach I'd never been to, holding hands with a man whose face was always just slightly out of frame. My friends thought it was creepy. My family told me to report it. But when I looked deeper, I found something even worse. I found a Reddit account under my name posting diary entries in my voice pages and pages of imagined affection, made up details about my boyfriend's favorite meals, the way he smelled after showers, how he touched my hair when I cried. None of this was real, but it was written like it was, like I had lived it. It got darker. One morning, I opened my university email to find a message from an unknown address with the subject line, "We read perfect together." Inside was a link to a Google Drive folder. The folder had hundreds of AI-generated photos of me naked, laughing, crying, pregnant, holding a baby, wearing a wedding dress. The captions described our life together, with future dates marked down, our wedding day, our baby's birth, even our death, together in a hospital bed. He had scripted an entire lifetime with me. Not just dreams or fantasies, fully rendered images of a future I never agreed to. And every face in those photos looked just like mine. Slightly warped, slightly wrong, but undeniably me. By the time I went to the police, he had already created over 500 videos. He had told his friends we were together. He had emailed my professors pretending to be my husband. He'd even started sending thank you notes to people I worked with, pretending we were married and expecting our first child. And yet when I reported it, all they said was, "It's not a threat. He hasn't touched you. He hasn't hurt you." But what they didn't understand was that he had touched me. Every part of my life was soaked in his version of it. He didn't need to be near me to control me. He lived in my digital shadow, puppeteering my image like a doll in a house he built without my consent. Eventually, they arrested him, not for stalking, but for possession of child abuse material. He had spiraled so far that even the fantasy of me wasn't enough anymore. He had created a digital world of victims, all stitched from stolen photos, AI models, and generated scripts. I was just the centerpiece, the wife, the main character in a life that never happened. But even now, after the arrest, the videos still circulate. My name is still tied to that fantasy. Every time I Google myself, there's a new upload, a new caption, a new comment that says, "I wish I had what they had." But we didn't have anything. I didn't even know his name until the day they printed it in the papers. He rang the doorbell twice, standing just below the peephole, with a calm expression and something close to a smile, because he knew she always answered. He had waited years for this moment, mapping out every second of it in his mind, replaying it like a movie reel. First the hello, then the small talk, maybe even a nervous laugh if she let him in. He didn't expect her to be afraid. Not yet. She wasn't supposed to die that day. That's the part that never sat right. Not with the neighbors who heard the scream or the officers who arrived too late. She was supposed to be preparing for the biggest audition of her life, The Godfather Part 3, with a fresh script delivery scheduled that morning. Instead, she opened her door to a stranger, Who wasn't he a stranger at all, at least not to her face, which he'd memorized from magazine covers, sitcoms, interviews, and, eventually, photos taken without her knowing. She opened her door because she thought he was just a fan, another face in a line of admirers who never crossed the threshold between admiration and obsession. But Robert John Bardo had been living in that threshold for years, quietly waiting, watching, and building a fantasy that didn't need her permission. He had written her letters before, over a dozen, each one slightly more intense than the last. One of them she even responded to a short note with a signed photo, a kindness. But to him it was confirmation, an invitation, a thread he could weave into something much bigger. He had tried to visit her once at the studio gates, holding his letter like a badge, believing security would part the way like sea foam. They didn't. He left furious, humiliated, and more determined than ever. He didn't have her phone number. Didn't he have a way to connect the dots between fantasy and reality until he found out the DMV would sell you almost anyone as home address for less than the cost of a nice dinner. All he needed was her full name, which he already knew, and within a week he had her address, printed cleanly on a slip of paper that he folded and unfolded over and over again until the creases split. He traveled from Arizona to Los Angeles by bus, wearing a faded shirt and carrying a copy of The Catcher in the Rye, the book he claimed gave him clarity. He arrived in Hollywood like a man stepping into a dream he'd had for too long. When he knocked the first time, she answered with the same warmth she carried on screen, sweet, polite, and slightly confused. She didn't recognize him, not really, and certainly not as the threat he was. They spoke briefly, and she gently told him she was busy and asked him not to return. And that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. He walked away, crossed the street, ordered breakfast at a diner, and sat alone while something inside him hardened. Then, after exactly 1 hour, he came back. Same clothes. Same book, same expression. When she opened the door the second time, he pulled the gun from under his jacket and shot her once in the chest, point blank with a .357 Magnum revolver. She fell backward, reportedly saying only one word. Why? She bled out just inside her front door while her neighbors, too shocked to process the sound of the shot, hesitated a moment too long. By the time emergency services arrived, she was already gone. The man who killed her didn't flee. Not really. He walked the streets for a day, then wandered into traffic back in Tucson, ranting and raving about what he had done until someone called the police. His arrest was quiet. His trial was not. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And still, none of that brought her back. But her death changed everything. The ease with which he had obtained her address caused an uproar. Lawmakers, celebrities, and the general public demanded reform. California passed the first anti-stalking law in the country the following year. The DMV changed its policies. And later, a federal law, the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, was enacted to prevent any stalker from ever again buying their way into someone else's home with nothing more than a name. She was only 21, a rising star, a daughter, a friend. And because of one man's obsession, she became a symbol of a law that shouldn't have needed to exist. Her murder was not a crime of passion. It was a crime of entitlement, of delusion, of a man who believed that watching someone on screen meant they belonged to him. And in that quiet apartment on that bright summer morning, in the span of 1 minute and 1 bullet, that belief stole a life and changed the law forever. They found the bag first. Inside was a knife, a hammer, cable ties, and a note that simply said, "Don't lie." They logged it as lost property, locked it away in a storeroom, and never looked back. She was dead 5 weeks later. Gracie had always been the kind of person who noticed when things didn't feel right. She didn't jump to conclusions or make drama out of nothing, but she wasn't naive either. She knew what it meant when a man who once sat next to her at work suddenly started waiting in the car park after her shifts. She knew what it meant when her social media was being watched, when messages she hadn't responded to were followed by more shorter, sharper, more demanding. She reported it. She filled out the forms. She used the right words. He's showing up where I am. He's not letting it go. I think he's capable of something worse. The police jotted it down, nodded, told her they'd look into it. They didn't, not really. She was labeled low risk, and the man Michael was simply told to leave her alone. There was no follow-up, no escalation plan, no urgency. Gracie carried on with her life, trying to believe that their words meant something, that someone somewhere was taking notes, but they weren't. Then came the bag. A dog walker found it one morning near the field where Gracie kept her horse. It wasn't hidden. It had been tucked under a hedge just out of sight. Inside there was a hunting knife, duct tape, painkillers, and that note. The note that read like a promise. Police collected it, glanced inside, and filed it under miscellaneous. They didn't take fingerprints. They didn't trace the purchase receipts. They didn't warn Gracie. She only found out about the bag after everything else was already too late. June 18th was just another morning. Cool and overcast, the kind where mist lingers just long enough to blur the horizon. Gracie left home before 8 a.m. to tend to her horse. She had plans that day. Nothing special, just errands. Maybe a coffee with a friend later. Maybe a lazy ride through the fields. What she didn't know was that Michael had already been there, hiding somewhere in the trees, pacing through dew-soaked grass, with that same knife from the bag now clenched in his hand. He watched her. We don't know how long. Maybe minutes. Maybe longer. She likely saw him too late, maybe only a few feet away, face twisted with something final. They found her later, lying in the field, her hands bloodied from trying to fight him off. She had been stabbed in the neck, chest, and back 10 times. The kind of violence that isn't sudden, it's sustained, focused, intentional. Michael's body was discovered a short distance away. He had taken his own life, but not before writing another note. This one was longer, rambling, unhinged. He accused her of lying, of leading him on, of ruining him. The words were familiar, classic stalker language, the kind of thinking that turns women into objects and blame into fuel. The kind of person Gracie had told them about months before. The kind of person she had tried to warn them he was. The kind of person the police had labeled as not a threat. The inquest was brutal. Her family sat in silence as officials admitted they had mishandled her report, that no one had followed up with her workplace, that no one had connected the dots between her complaint and the weapons stash found yards from her riding route, that a young woman had done everything she was supposed to, reported the danger, asked for help, followed the rules, and still ended up dead. People called it a failure, a breakdown in communication, a tragic oversight. But those words don't capture what it really was. A system that listened just long enough to feel satisfied, then turned away before it had to act. Today there's a campaign in her name. People talk about Gracie's law, about stalking, reform, and police accountability. And while that's good, while that matters, it doesn't change what happened in that quiet field. It doesn't change the last terrified seconds of her life. It doesn't change the fact that she saw what was coming and was still left completely alone. What keeps people up at night isn't just the violence, though. It's the silence before it, the empty rooms, the unread emails, the box in the police station labeled found property that sat on a shelf while a killer planned his final steps. They say she was brave, and she was. But bravery should never be what's left when protection fails. Gracie warned them. She told them he was dangerous. She begged them to look, and they didn't, until it was too late.